Hello again, welcome back to the final part of Tale's End and the final part of the Bushy Tale books. And it all starts with chapter 9, in which fire breaks out. It was the mice who noticed first. When you're a mouse, everything looks big, so the flames from the No-Fur's fire, which were at first only small, looked huge to the mice. They ran away from the clearing where the No-Furs had been, squeaking, "Fire! Fire!" at the tops of their voices. But when you're a mouse, you can squeak all you like, but it's not very often anyone hears you. The hedgehogs are the next to notice. There's a fear of fire drummed into hedgehogs from when they are very young. Be careful when you go for your big sleep in a pile of leaves, young hedgehogs are always taught. No-Furs like to burn piles of leaves. Remember what happened to your Uncle Spike. Strangely, most hedgehogs seem to have an Uncle Spike who fell asleep in a pile of leaves. Young hedgehogs are educated in the smell of burning leaves, so they can always tell if the leaves under which they have chosen to go to sleep are on fire. There was definitely a smell of burning leaves in the woods that day. The trouble is, hedgehogs are not really bright enough to know what to do about such things. "Smells like Uncle Spike has fallen asleep again," one hedgehog said, missing the point entirely. "No, Uncle Spike's at home," another hedgehog replied. "I've just left him." "Not your Uncle Spike," the first hedgehog said. "My Uncle Spike." "Oh, right," the second hedgehog said. "Do you think we better wake him up?" So the hedgehogs debated, and while they did, the fire began to spread. The rabbits were the next to notice. They sat at the edge of the clearing, watching grey tendrils of smoke rise up from the grass. They watched as small tongues of flame appeared through the smoke. But they did what rabbits do. They watched, unsure about what to do, then dived into the nearest holes and hid. It was the birds who reported the fire. A group of sparrows saw what was happening and flew round the woods tweeting, "Fire! Fire!" as loudly as they could. But birds being birds, they flew as high as they could to keep safe, and for a while nobody on the ground could hear what they were tweeting about. By the time the smoke reached the more sensitive noses of animals like the foxes and the badgers, the fire had taken hold and there was nothing any of them could do about it. Colin, Trixie and Ray were completely unaware of the drama that was unfolding behind them. They were heading into the darkest parts of the woods. They walked carefully, with Ray scouting up ahead, his ears back and his snout to the ground, alert for any danger. "Why is it so dangerous here?" Colin had asked. "Why don't animals come here?" "Nobody is really sure," Ray had answered grimly. "There are all sorts of rumours. They say this part of the woods has animals none of us have ever seen. Bad animals. They say there are rats the size of badgers and some kinds of cats that only live here and are bigger than us." "Really?" Trixie had asked, her eyes big with fear, all excitement gone. "But that's rumours for you," Ray had replied. "I wouldn't believe a word of it until I see one. Come on, let's find your friends and get back before we do." So they went, cautiously glancing round at every noise they heard, but so far they had seen no animal at all. Apart from the occasional creak of a branch or a rustle of leaves, there was no sound in this part of the woods other than the sound that their paws made on the damp leaves and the distant trickle of a river somewhere in the distance. "I can hear water," Trixie observed. "Best stay away from that," Ray told her. "If rumours are true, that's where the crocodiles might be." Colin became aware that as soon as Ray had said that, Trixie moved a bit closer to him. He could feel her warmth through the fur as she walked next to him and realised that, for all her annoying ways, he didn't mind a bit. They'd become so used to all the quiet around them that when they suddenly heard the sound of rustling coming from the undergrowth up ahead, they froze. Colin could see that the fur had risen on his father's hackles and that Ray was sniffing the air, his keen amber eyes narrowed and his teeth bared in a snarl. "Something's coming," he hissed. "Several somethings." "What is it?" Colin asked in a whisper. "Can you get a scent?" He sniffed too. The rustling was getting closer. "Get ready, boy," Ray said, his whole body tense for a fight. "Girl," he said to Trixie, "get in those bushes." "I'm staying here," Trixie replied with a tremble in her voice. "Then let's just hope you're as good at fighting as you are at talking," Ray said. The rustling suddenly got louder and something pushed its way through the bushes, something moving fast and straight towards them. Whatever this animal was, Ray was on it immediately, snarling and growling. The animal gave off angry shouts and tried to fight back, but Ray pinned it to the ground. Colin ran over to help and was so caught completely by surprise when another, much smaller animal landed on his back, giving off furious squeaks and squeals. He felt small claws digging into his ears and he couldn't see because the animal's tail was in his face, covering his eyes. What he could see, however, stopped the fight immediately. "Get off," he barked. "It's me." "Colin?" a voice asked, muffled underneath Ray. "Brian?" Colin asked in reply. "I don't believe it," Ray said, stepping back from Brian and nearly falling over Nell, who had just found her way out of the bushes. "It's your idiot friends." "I'm glad to see you," Whitetip said, hopping down off Colin's back. "But we've got to get back to the woods. Squish has been taken by a buzzard and we think they came this way." Chapter 10, in which Squish goes up the biggest tree. On the day Squish went up the biggest tree, very few animals noticed. Very few animals even noticed that Colin, Trixie and Ray had returned from a very short trip to the darkest part of the woods, bringing with them Whitetip, Brian and Nell. They were too busy running backwards and forwards or trying to hide in their holes as the fire, which had now taken hold of the clearing in the woods, threatened their homes and their lives. The bushes and bracken which grew around the bottom of the tallest pine trees were burning, and the air was filled with smoke and the smell of scorched pine sap. Nobody knew what to do. Even Professor Otis, the wisest owl in the woods, could only advise that everyone else got away from the fire as quickly as they could. Nobody could see through the smoke that on a branch, high up in the tallest pine tree in the woods, a large buzzard was perched on a branch, looking down at the chaos below. Trapped beneath the buzzard's huge talons and the branch was a red squirrel. Squish had always wondered how the birds felt when they flew. He'd always thought that it must feel a bit like squirrels feel when they jump from branch to branch, only better. When the buzzard had seized him by the fur and carried him off, he discovered that he actually didn't like it at all. He was lucky that the buzzard only grabbed his fur and not his flesh, or he might have been badly injured. All the same, he was still carried through the air at a dizzying speed. He didn't feel especially lucky and decided that flying was best left to the birds. Now, pinned to a branch with the buzzard's weight on top of him, he didn't feel lucky at all. And was that smoke he could smell coming from somewhere below? He decided the best thing to do was lie still and hope that the buzzard got bored and left him alone. As the other animals ran about in panic, Whitetip and her friends stood at a safe distance from the fire. "We've got to do something," she cried. "Squish could be anywhere with that bird. We've got to find him." "We can't do anything in this smoke," Colin told her. "We can't see a thing and there's no way of picking up a scent." At that moment the friends heard a loud rustling noise and the sound of no-fur voices. 3 of the no-furs, the animals called rain jars, had come running through the smouldering undergrowth to see the fire. One had a large container of water which he threw onto the fire, and the other 2 started to beat the flames with sticks. As the rain jars tackled the fire, Whitetip heard the flapping of wings and looked up to see a large buzzard flying away from a huge pine tree nearby. "The buzzard!" she squeaked. "Squish must be up there." Before anyone could stop her, she'd run up the back of a very startled rain jar and jumped onto the trunk of the pine tree. The bark was still warm under her paws, but she ignored it and climbed as quickly as she could. Up and up she climbed, feeling as though the tree would never end. Her paws hurt, and her eyes stung with the smoke which was still hanging in the air, but she climbed until she could see, right at the top of the tree, Squish, painfully holding on to the highest branch. "I'm coming, Squish," she called. "Hold on." "Whitetip," Squish called back. "I didn't think I'd ever see you again." "You don't get rid of me that easily," Whitetip replied, gritting her teeth to haul herself up the last bit of the tree. She arrived at the branch to which Squish was clinging and looked down. The undergrowth below was still burning, and the flames had now caught onto some of the lower branches of their tree. "The only problem now is how we get down," she said. "The next tree isn't burning," Squish pointed out, "but I don't know if I can jump that far right now." "You can if I help you," Whitetip told him. "Let me get my breath back and we'll see." She didn't take long to recover from her climb. She helped Squish stand on the branch, and together they edged along to the end. They looked from there to the next tree. It would have been a bit difficult jump for a squirrel at the best of times, but Squish was still weak and in pain from his encounter with the buzzard. "Take my paw," Whitetip said. "I won't let you go." "I'll drag you down," Squish protested. "We won't make it." "I'm not going without you," Whitetip replied firmly. "We go together or we stay here together." "Whatever you say," Squish said with an attempt at a smile. "That's the idea." Whitetip grinned and held his paw tightly. "Now, are you ready?" Whitetip could never be sure what happened next. Maybe Squish was just too weak, or maybe he really did think he would drag her down. But as she leapt from the branch into the air, she felt Squish let go of her paw. As she landed uncomfortably on the branch of the next tree, she could only watch in horror as the brave, clever, funny squirrel around whom she had planned the rest of her life fell. Epilogue. Whitetip is glad the children have usually fallen asleep before she reaches that bit of the story. It isn't ever easy to tell, but it's part of the story and has to be told. She sits back in her chair and sighs. One day the children will have their own stories to tell, but for now they're content to sleep. The door to the dray opens behind her. "Have you bored them to sleep again?" a voice asked. "If you think it's easy, Squish, tomorrow night you can tell them the story and I'll go out and gather the nuts," Whitetip replies. "We could both tell the story," Squish suggests. "It is our story." "The nuts won't gather themselves," Whitetip says. "Did they fall asleep before the end again?" Squish asks. "As always," Whitetip replies. "They never get to hear how you managed to grab that branch, or how their Uncle Brian stood under the branch so you would have something soft to land on, or how you singed the tip of your tail." "One day we'll get to tell them how the fur grew back," Squish says. Squish swishes his tail to admire the pure white fur which grows at its tip. The children think squirrels who have completely red tails are weird. "I can't think why," Whitetip laughs, as she tucks 3 small, white-tipped tails back under the bedding. "Oh, I met Colin and Trixie," Squish tells her. "The cubs are getting big now. They keep talking about wanting to have adventures like their dad." "Well, the children can go and play with them tomorrow," Whitetip answers. "Close the door now, Squish. That's enough stories for one day." Squish shuts the door to the dray. He always does what Whitetip asks. And that is where we leave them. One day their children may have their own stories to tell, and so might the children of Brian and Nell, and Colin and Trixie. Lives go on, but sometimes stories just reach the end.